Well, good afternoon. My name is Tom Smith. I'm here at the Grant Cottage in Saratoga, New York, and I'm here to perform for you with my banjo and present some music from a program that I entitled Music in Grant's Time. The time that we're talking about, of course, is the 1800s. It was greatly different than the world we live in now. We know that, of course, for many, many aspects. One of the things that I suspect was quite true is that things were very quiet and at night very dark. So it was a very, very different world that they were living in. As a result, things, I believe, were much slower and much quieter. As a result, I'm playing an instrument now that has no amplification and is meant to replicate the sound that likely had been reproduced during the 1800s. I hope you enjoy it. Ulysses Grant was born Hiram Ulysses Grant in 1822. The United States was only 46 years old when he was born. He was a great man. As a soldier, he rose to the rank of general in the American Civil War. He was our 18th president, serving 2 terms. He was an author of his memoirs, which is a book still in publication today. And as well, we must remember that he was also a son, a father, a husband, and a grandfather. He died on July 23rd, 1885, in the building where I am standing with you right now. This is Mount McGregor in Saratoga. Music is the international language. We can find mostly, well, European-wise, we play music in different languages, but the music is the same. Give the music from Italy to Germany to America, and they can play it. It's been with humanity since the beginning of time. It's an opportunity for humans to express emotions and provide a bit of escape from times that may be a bit troublesome. All societies, back to the ancients, had some sort of music. The banjo that I'm going to be playing here is not like a modern banjo. The banjos from the 1800s had what they call catgut strings, which was essentially the sinews and muscles of smaller animals that they stretched and strung out. Well, it sounds much different than the modern bluegrass banjos with the metal twangy sound that we're familiar with. So it sounds more mellow. As a result, frankly, if I was at a in-person concert here right now, I would advise people of such, and they're very respectable and tend to be a bit more quiet than we are today, which is probably how life was conducted more in the 1800s. So, what's interesting about the banjo as well, why I chose this, and it is one of my favorite instruments, is the banjo is kind of figured to be one of the American first instrument. It was, however, the concept of it, it did not look like this originally, like anything, it evolves, was the slavery trade brought over their customary instruments. And one of them was called a banjar. Pretty simply, a hollowed out gourd with some catgut strings stretched across it, and they strummed it of sorts. Well, as you can imagine, over time, over years, things evolve, things emerge, and we have this. This is what we have now. This is called a 5-string banjo, and it is fretted. I hope you enjoy the sound. The greatest music activity in the 1800s were the minstrel shows. Although creating some controversy today, I'd like to tell you that they were very, very popular, primarily during the 1830s to the 1870s, with a peak about 1848. These were the shows that traveled around and gave people their entertainment of the day. It was more of a presentation and activity on a stage to watch than, you know, high quality symphonic music, frankly. It was the pop music of the day, and eventually turned into what we refer to now as vaudeville. Okay, let's focus on Grant now a little bit. Grant was 10 years old in 1832 when the song America, My Country 'Tis of Thee was written. After that, such songs as The Girl I Left Behind Me, and by the time 1844 came around, when Grant was a second lieutenant, having graduated from West Point, he was stationed out at the Jefferson Barracks outside of Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, and it was an isolated, desolated area where he served out many outposts. And he was engaged to his wife Julia at the time, and was quietly frank lonesome for her affection and fondness. One of the songs that was written on that year was a song called Buffalo Gals that you may recognize. Interesting song. It was written by a man named John Coolwhite Hodges. It was originally named Lubley Fan. And the different cities that the song traveled around to play during its beginning took on the names of the cities. So it was such things as Boston Gals, New York Gals. Ultimately, though, it landed on Buffalo Gals. So let me play that for you now. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed that. 1846 brought us to the Mexican War, a hideous event in our nation's history, of course, and Grant was a young soldier where he met, frankly, a lot of the young men that would become the lieutenants, both foe and enemy, or rather enemy and companion during the Civil War. The song is called Blue Tail Fly, or Jimmy Crack Corn. A man named, a composer and a publisher named Daniel Decatur Emmett wrote this song, and I'd like to play this for you now. Shortened version. Thank you again. It's always good to bring relatives to these things. Alrighty. The biggest composer of the time was Stephen Foster. He was the hottest thing on the market at the time. He would have been like Michael Jackson and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles rolled into one. He was born on July 4th, 1826 in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania. Now, I'll ask you two questions, and those that give good answers will get a present. It was the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. However, two past presidents died on that date. Can anyone tell me who those two presidents were?
Adams and Jefferson.
Very good, very good. Two correct answers. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Anyway, all history people love trivia, right? He was the 10th of 11 children, a big family, probably well forgotten by the time they came to him. He was a pioneer in the music world and mainly required no accompaniment with his music. He tried to appeal to the average voice to making songs generally easy to sing. He was quite prolific and published and composed well over 200 songs in his lifetime. However, he was exploited and cheated many, many times during his career. We must understand that the music industry in the 1800s was far different than it is today. You didn't go into a store and buy something off a computer. You had the Apple Store or a CD or something. It was sheet music. That was the music industry at the time. So what would happen is unscrupulous publishers would go to various concerts, hear a song that they liked, particularly a new one coming on. They would go back to their band, redo it, and publish it in their own name. So it was just a way of the times, and certainly different than today, thankfully, especially for professional musicians. Foster died on January 13th, 1864. He was only 38 years old, quite young by any standards. He was alone, he was bankrupt, and sadly, he died as a devout alcoholic. I think he had like 38 cents in his pocket when he died. Anyway, we move along. 1848, we have Grant marrying Julia. At 1849, Grant has now been promoted to a first lieutenant and is stationed out by Fort Wayne in Detroit, Michigan. A song comes out in that year by Foster. that was a minstrel song popular, one of these ones where the copyright was pirated, and it had to do with the gold rush, the 49ers going out to California. It really established Foster as the pro that he was, and it has become the most recognized song around the world. It was first performed on September 11th, 1847 in Andrew's Eagle Ice Cream Saloon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And ultimately it was purchased for $5. The song is "Oh Susannah." Let's see if you recognize it. Susannah. A lot of the words in that was referred to as a term called doggerel, just silliness. A certain stanza, right? It rained so hard the day I left the weather, it was dry. It was so hot I froze to death, Susannah, don't you cry. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but it made people a lot of happiness to sing it. 1851, Grant is off to California. He's alone. His wife is not with him, his firstborn son is not with him, and he has not seen his secondborn son. A song came out at this time by Foster in 1851, and you may recognize it, other than it had two titles, and it's called Old Folks at Home, otherwise known as Swanee River. Now, a little point of interest is this: when they started writing this and marketing it, they peddled it as the PD River, and they peddled it as the Yazoo River. Well, they didn't market it very well, it didn't carry, so ultimately it landed on Swanee River. Thank you very much. 1854, Grant progresses, and he now leaves the Army after 10 years. He is a captain. Tries to make it on his own in various aspects in life in the civilian world, and is not quite successful. 1859, he brings himself to a point of great humility, I suspect, to go to his father, who is a quite successful businessman in Galena, Illinois, and he asks him for work. And Grant's father agrees and helps him out. Well, 1860, while Grant is in Galena and the Civil War is bubbling up quite strongly, a song is written by Foster. It's called Old Black Joe. It's a wonderful tune. Frankly, I remember my mother singing it to me when I was a child to put me to sleep every day, I guess, for a rest. But anyway, it's a wonderful story. Foster, of course, I mentioned his difficulties, and he was engaged to a wonderful, wonderful woman from a fine, fine family. Her name was Jane McDowell. But things did not quite go well for that. But he spent quite a bit of time at their home. And one of their home servants, the elderly fellow Joe, the servant, doorman, driver, he was a jack of all trades for the folks in that family. And he was loved and well respected by them. And Foster took quite a liking to him, and said that he's going to write a song about the man. And sure enough, he did. kind of hard to talk about Grant and not refer to the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Grant, of course, played a great role in that. The songs are increased in popularity, and there was much more publication and composition of songs, mostly to encourage and stimulate sentimental feelings between the people at home and the soldiers, patriotic feelings as well. And you know, there was a great deal of ethnicity in this country at that time. We had the Irish, the Germans, and others who were helping to fight the, you know, the classic English who had been here for quite some time, from Great Britain at least. So there's a song that I like, and I guess I landed on the Irish. They served quite a bit of blood, sweat, and tears in the war, and I'd like to play a song that was a representative of the Irish and that they thought quite a bit. It was adapted from an older song in the Great Britain's history called the Maureen. It's called The Minstrel Boy. The minstrel boy to the war has gone, and the ranks of death you will find him. Thy songs are made by the pure and free, they shall never sound in slavery. Also, too, the band served different purposes. We, of course, had the sentimentality and the patriotism, a lot brought about by the regimental bands within the Army. They helped to provide some esprit de corps and whatnot. There was another purpose of the bands and that they served that's not well known and you know, sort of troublesome to think about. But what they did, they served a great need on the eves of battle, rather the after effects of battle, on the evenings after the battles. They would situate many times the regimental bands between the field hospitals and the men in bivouac, so that it would be like a buffer between the hideous screams and cries from these poor men as the other soldiers were trying to contemplate their own future and you know, their, of course, sadness for their colleagues. So northern songs came about, such things as Marching Through Georgia, The Girl I Left Behind Me, The Battle Cry of Freedom, John Brown's Body, and there were also songs about Ulysses S. Grant. Many of these are greatly unforgettable, unfortunately, but I will tell you that they are called some the Grant Pill, General Grant's Demand, Grant Our Great Commander, and Grant the Daring, the Lion-Hearted. Maybe we could do an additional concert one day on all Grant tunes. Wouldn't that be fun? All right, so popular song in the North during the war was a song called Lincoln and Liberty. It came from an older tune, as most of these did, called Old Rosin the Bow. Now, a point of interest you may like is that many other campaigns also used this song in the past and the future. In 1840, William Henry Harrison used it, 1844, James Polk, and in 1888, Benjamin Harrison. Now, the South, the Confederacy, also had their own songs. They had such things as the Yellow Rose of Texas, Bonnie Blue Flag, Goober Peas, Lorena, Maryland, My Maryland. But, of course, the most popular one from the South is, of course, their Confederate anthem, which is Dixie. Dixie was written and played in New York City, which is quite amazing in itself, in 1859. And it was written by Daniel Decatur Emmett, the fellow who actually wrote the Blue Tail. I'd like to take a little bit of artistic liberty with you here and do a little bit of an interpretive a presentation of the song. Thank you for that. Okay, the North and South, I'm not going to play the songs they're doing them. I'd like to do it again in another show, but I'm not here to talk about that. Both the North and South took songs, but they took them for their own words, and they put the Southern twist on it and the Northern twist on it. A good one that's quite enjoyable is a song called Wait for the Wagon, where the North made the old Union wagon, and the South song was, of course, the Southern wagon. A song that came out of the Civil War era, which is interesting, I feel, for, you know, a little history of trivia here, is a song called Orally. It was a beautiful song. It was a love song, quite lovely melody. But that song was resurrected in 1956 by Elvis Presley, and it became Love Me Tender. So, my point with this is to say how enduring some of these melodies are from 150 years ago. Alrighty, so I'd like to move along here to a particular battle. It's called Murfreesboro. It's Tennessee, about central Tennessee. It wasn't a huge battle by battle standards. I mean, 85,000 men is quite a few to be fighting and killing each other. But however, it was not a huge battle, but it was significant for Abraham Lincoln in that he could release the Emancipation Proclamation. Curious battle. It lasted over 3 days, from New Year's Eve, December 31st, 62, through January 2nd, 63. Now, it was a terrible, bitter, bitter, cold, unusual winter in Tennessee, and everything was frozen. The Southerners were beside themselves. It was a very, very bad battle, bad losses on both sides. However, the night before battle, both sides are separated in this icy ground, still, no wind, bitter cold, separated by about 75 yards of the Stones River. So sounds carried, as we know. Now, what happened was, spontaneously, is that the Union Army, their regimental bands, started to play up Yankee Doodle. Within a few moments, the Southern troops are playing Dixie in response. After that, the Southern troops played Bonnie Blue Flag, and the Union responded with playing Hail Columbia. Well, this went on back and forth for a little bit, and finally, it's said that the both of them spontaneously and uniformly played this song, which I think you may recognize. That was, of course, Home Sweet Home. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. Home, home, sweet, sweet home. There's no place like home. One can only imagine what those soldiers thought of that night as they went to sleep. 1863, big year in the Civil War, right? Like one day after Gettysburg, we have Grant in Vicksburg, and I'm sure that made President Lincoln quite pleased with his generalship. Well, the song that comes out of that for the South mostly, but both sang it, was a song called Johnny Comes Marching Home Again. I think we should all be pretty familiar with that of some sorts. So it was originally called, again, coming out of the older original music, Johnny, We Hardly Knew Ye. But it was written by a man named Patrick Gilmore, who was a bandmaster for the Army in New Orleans. So let me play that for you now. Feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Church bell peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The village lads and lasses say, with roses they will strew away. Oh, feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. President Abraham Lincoln, elected in 1860, had a vision of a unified nation without slavery. Union General Grant was the man that made that vision a reality. Go Down Moses is an American Negro spiritual that describes events in the Old Testament of the Bible in which God commands Moses to demand the release of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. Well, in the song there's coded words. Israel generally means the African American slave. Egypt and Pharaoh usually mean the slave master. Going down to Egypt is derived from the biblical origin where Egypt is consistently perceived as being below other land. From Egypt is up. In the context of American slavery, the American sense of down converged with the concept of down the river, the Mississippi, where slaves' conditions were notoriously worse. A situation which left the idiom sell someone down the river in present-day English. In the song, ex-slave Harriet Tubman may very well have been the actual Moses. As a tireless conductor on the Underground Railroad, she made scores of journeys into slavery's Egypt land, returning north each time with a group of runaway slaves. When Israel was in Egypt's land, my people go, oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Let my people go. All right, approaching the end here, and thank you for your patience. 1876 brings us to the presidency, the second term of President Grant. It was also the centennial of the United States. A song that was written this year that I thought was always fun. I liked it as a kid, frankly, and I was hoping that you would. Some of our more seasoned patrons here may recognize the song from childhood. It's called Grandfather's Clock. Henry Clay Work, the composer and publisher, published this, and it was originally presented in the George Hotel in England. I find it a very clever song. It used its words not just as moon and spoon and June. It had some turns. It's a very clever song about this man describing his clock as being the perfect employee. So let me see if I can do something that would be worthy, that you would enjoy. Our final point here in the program, and I hope you can bear with me with the bad news I'm about to share with you. One of the ironies of doing this show in honor of General Grant is that General Grant hated music. As a matter of fact, it gave him headaches, and he would go to great extremes really to avoid music that he didn't have to listen to. With an exception, he greatly loved the regimental bands. He thought it was wonderful for the men, for their motivation and their patriotism and everything. And I must share with you too that because of Grant's tone deafness and dislike for music, all the bands loved him, because no matter how bad they sounded, he would give them the biggest round of applause for the quality of their music, and then I suspect happily trot off. There was even a story where he that I read once, that he rode 6 miles out of his way to avoid listening to some music that he didn't have to attend to. Anyway, he had what I've heard is referred to as congenital amusia. That means he was born with a hatred or dislike of music. But he was essentially tone deaf. He couldn't hum. He hated to dance. He never went to concerts or anything. So he has a famous quote that I'd like to leave with you now that many of you know. But those of you who don't, it's wonderful to keep in the back of your mind. When asked about his music issue here, Grant just said that, "I can recognize only 2 songs. One is Yankee Doodle and the other isn't." So with that humor gone by us now, let's take a minute and do Yankee Doodle. A great song, a great American song that's been around since the 1770s, actually not far from here in Saratoga. Many versions of it. It came again out of Europe and some of the oldest songs. But I must tell you a few things before I start. It is not quite what you think of it is to the English. We're quite proud when you hear this song and we wave our flags and clap our hands. However, at the time, a Yankee was considered to be a disheveled colonialist from the French and Indian Wars. A doodle was a word for a simpleton. And macaroni was at the time a foppish wig, a very grand display and flamboyant hair wig. So of course when we hear, Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni, I mean what they're saying is this, this doodle disheveled colonialist rode into town, he stuck a feather in his hat and called it a foppish wig. So we'll go along with that and try to have some fun with the song. I'd like to do two verses for you, and if you'd like to sing along, please do. Captain Gooding, there we saw the little boys as thick as hasty pudding. Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Mind the music and the step and what the girls behind. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Mind the music and the step and what the girls behind. Thank you very, very much. I wish you well, and if you have interest, you can always contribute to the Grant Cottage. Thank you so very much.